Alright, this is the bubblegum gates. I wanted to make some big intimidating gates for my Candyland style campaign. So I started with some heavy watercolor paper. I really like to work with it because it works well with my T-square, and it's durable. It'll last for a couple projects. So using my compass, I made some nice rounded shapes, traced out a template on some foam core, and then cut it out with my X-Acto. It looks like I'm cutting out some like tombstone shapes to help overlap onto the gate, give it some dimension, as well as hide the hinges I plan on putting on there. So then I went to work cutting out some circles using my makeshift jig, circle cutting jig on my Proxon. Then I sliced them thin, just so that I could have some stuff to add detail to the gates with. I cut a couple different sizes, a couple different thicknesses, some rings, just different generally round shapes for the bubble gum gates. Hot gluing them down here. I would have used PVA glue. I should have used it in retrospect, but I thought maybe the hot glue would add a little bit more bubblegum characteristic when it like leaked out from underneath. If I put a little extra, should have used PVA glue. If I do it again, definitely will. Positioning the hinges, I hot glued them down and then used the foam core to kind of sandwich them in there, make it a little more sturdy. It wasn't really worth looking into using screws or any traditional methods for putting these on. And they're not really load bearing anyway, so this was appropriate, I felt. Next, adding some detail to the inside of the gates. I added some little holes with a pin or something, and then made some concentric rectangles here to give it kind of just an interesting detail on the back, something to bring out when I dry brush later. Here I'm using some cut-off pins, some straight pins I had that have a nice little sphere on the end. These are nice little details to add to the bubble gum gate. Then I decided to cut out some other tombstone shapes, the same height as the gates, 5 inches. So that I would have something to secure the gates to, so the hinges could attach to something and they'd be freestanding. So I cut a couple different size shapes of these tombstones so they'd fit together. Nice big rounded bastions, really. Using a template method again, traced them out on some XPS foam, and with my Proxon, super simple. Here I took some columns, just some sticks of foam I made, and then similar to the tree video I made, I'm just cutting off the corners, giving it some detail. This way I have a long stick with which to slice off some different stones for tiles that aren't exactly square or rectangle, just something different. I wanted a little bit rounder. Then I, of course, glued the bastions together. Using the Proxon, this is the base. I made it it was 5 by 11. Anyhow, taking off the edges, making it a little more interesting looking, while still keeping it minimal. Here I'm slicing thin slices off of my tile stick, just for stonework, similar to how we do brick. Next, since it wasn't very many bricks, I decided to try this method, just using my foil ball and texture them right on my table. For this project, not bad. For brickwork and bigger things, I would definitely use the rocks in a jar or a can or something and texture them like that. Just some gravel style stones like they show on Blackmagic Craft. Next, I drew some guidelines here to kind of line up my bastions and my gates so that it would all line up and function. The inside of the gates I felt needed something to help it line up, so I cut this big beam to go across, and then I had a couple little neodymium magnets that I wanted to inset in there so it would help it line up. After all the Mod Podge and paint and stuff, it really didn't work that well. I should have used some stronger magnets, or maybe a doubled up or something, but it was interesting. It was worth the try. Then using just the nozzle of the glue gun, I melted some divots into these posts, and then recessed the magnet, sealing it in with some hot glue, and then using this silicone cup, I used it to just give it a nice flush edge. When I added in the rivets with the straight pin earlier, or toothpick, or whatever it was, I actually measured them out and was able to use the holes as guidelines here to line up these posts. Making sure the gate's still clear. Always, that was my biggest fear, was that they would scrape along the bottom or not line up or something like that. So I was very, very diligent about that. Next, and I should have done this ahead of time, but I was texturing the base there with some tin foil. I should have thought ahead and done that prior to that, though. Next, just some PVA glue, and started laying on my stone tiles as close as I can here, allowing them to hang out a little bit over the edge if they need to, and then I'll go back in with an X-Acto or something and trim off the excess. All surfaces here. I think eventually I came around the top and hid the top edges of this thing as well. Tedious work, but really worth it. All the little details are really what sets it apart. Next, I use this DAP brand Alex Fast Dry. It's in a acrylic latex caulk with silicone. I really love this stuff. I brought it over from the time I made a costume out of EVA foam, and it's really good to like hide the seams. And it's somewhat water-based, so I brought it over to this, used it like grout work to fill in the spaces between these tiles, and then came through with a damp cloth, a wet cloth, and took off all the excess and just left the stuff that I couldn't necessarily reach with a cloth, and that worked as a nice grout for these little stone tiles, and really makes it a heck of a lot stronger too. This is really good stuff to work with. Here, before I did the base coat, or the primer and Mod Podge coat, I came through and did a little bit of fine detail work just to, again, make it more interesting and have something to show off when I do the dry brushing as well. Next, I set to work with the Blackmagic Mod Podge. I think I want to try to make a white variety for when I do things like this. I do like the color, so I can see where I got it or didn't get it, but on some projects the black may not be appropriate. For this, I was going to use soft pinks and things like that, you know, bubblegum colors, so I thought it would be quicker just to do a primer coat, a base coat in just stark white, you know, that way the pink would really pick up and show off well later. Getting everything filled in, painted in. Kind of a big piece. Next I made this like a weird bruise, like gray purple. I decided I wanted some of it to look a little natural, so I went through this gray, then like a soft bubblegum pink to base it all out in. I don't think I got the footage of me, but I came through with a violet dry brush, real light lavender color, and hit the base with that to bring out some of the detail. Then I took some of this masking tape, painter's tape, and masked it off because I wanted to splatter the base and give it kind of a jawbreaker effect, a little more candy. Then I just had a produce bag that I covered the top of it. In retrospect, should have not done this. That tape, even though it was the most mild adhesive kind of painter's tape, it still took off some of the paint off of the foam. Fortunately, it was on the topmost edge. The dry brushing hid a lot of it, but yeah, in the future, if at all possible, do these things separate and then glue them together, I would suggest. But we live and we learn. Next, came through with a dry brush, pretty healthy dry brush of white. Well, it's the softest pink I could have made. You know, it was basically white, but just on this pink side. Pick up some of the detail here. Finally, I made a magenta wash, and that really sold it as a as bubblegum or as candy. This wash got into the recesses, darkened it up, but it was in the same like color spectrum. It was the same magenta that I made the pink out of, so it just gave it some more varying degree. Next, I went through with a purple I made and picked out a few of the easier stones to paint out, basing them with some nice bright purple. Just a little bit, and I kind of try to keep it even on both sides. And then a few highlights here in a little bit with some like a robin's egg, Tiffany blue. Same thing, just kind of picking out some of the easier to reach stones. Some details on the gate. Next, I made a pastel version of the purple and the Tiffany, and came through with just a soft dry brush, just so it didn't look so blatantly freshly painted, just to give it a little more detail. And that's really about it. I think I used a gloss clear coat. I took the risk and didn't use the Minwax this time. I wanted something glossy, and that's all I had on hand with some Krylon. So with a heavy Mod Podge base coat, it's really pretty safe. Just make sure you don't have any exposed styrofoam. I'd be afraid to melt down a big project, you know, in the very last step. Yeah, I cleaned up a little bit of the detail, came through and did a little more dry brushing. And here's the finished pieces with the clear coat. Backside came out all right. Cool. Thanks for watching.